Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us tonight. We love seeing people from all over the country watching with us or just here in McMurray. All of you interested in Peters Township history. If you just arrived, keep dropping in the chat where you're watching from tonight, or if you're watching locally, let us know how long you've lived in Peters Township. Before we get started, I'd like to go over just some quick housekeeping for the evening and then get into some information about the archives. So did we put instructions for closed captioning somewhere? Carrie, I know we had talked about that, but.
If the participants go towards the bottom of their screen, I believe they can find
closed captioning.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a button down there.
Okay.
Since we have so many people on the program tonight, we'd really appreciate it if you would keep your camera and microphone turned off. The chat will be open throughout the program if you have any questions or if you'd like to share your own memories about the dairy bar. And then at the end of the program, there will be a Q&A session as time allows. The information compiled for this program comes from original photos and documents that have been donated to the PTPL Archives by local residents. Of course, the more information we have and the more documents we have, the more thorough our presentations can be. So we always welcome new donations of original photos or documents related to Peters Township from any time period. You can always contact Margaret if you feel like you may have materials of interest. We had a wonderful donation come in from the Hutchison family recently, which Margaret will explain more about that in a little bit. I'd like to thank the Peters Township Library Foundation for generously supporting the archives. The foundation's mission is to provide fundraising and volunteer support to the library, and one project that they choose to fund is the archives. Supplies, technology, equipment, the fee for an archival consultant, those are things that are all covered by the foundation. We recently received a $3,450 historical and archival records care grant to digitize fragile items, and the foundation have also agreed to match that grant as well. If you would like to support the archives, you can always visit the library's website and click the red donate button, and in the notes field, you can just specify that you'd like your donation to go towards the archives. Let me mute somebody. There we go. So with that all being said, I'd like to turn it over to our presenters for tonight, Margaret Deitzer, our local history librarian, and Carrie Weaver, our PR and marketing coordinator, as well as some special guests throughout. They've done a really fantastic job putting together this slideshow and this presentation. And so I will turn it over to Margaret to get us started. And let me just go to the next slide here.
Thank you, Lacey. And I also want to thank everybody for joining us tonight and allowing us to share the stories from our Peters Township archives. The McMurray Dairy Bar is our focus for this evening. These presentations provide a wonderful opportunity for us to share the amazing resources we have received in the archives from many of our residents who lived here, who grew up here, and have moved away and have also returned, sharing their photographs, bringing their photographs, documents, and other memorabilia that we can add them to our resources. Our work in the archives is to preserve the historical materials, create the finding aids for these resources, and share the selections of our digital resources with our community. And towards the end of the program, Carrie will be giving you some more information about PA photos and documents. That is the location that we are adding our digital photographs to. We no longer add them to our library website. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to contact Carrie or myself, but more about that towards the end of the program. The photo in the left was a very special day for us. It shows the Hutchison family during a recent visit to the library for us to recognize the donation of glass slides depicting the early 1900s, mostly from the intersection, what was then the McMurray village. We were thrilled and honored that Jean McMurray celebrate a very special birthday when she came to the library with her daughters. The Hutchison family collection includes extensive resources related to early life in Peters Township. The photograph on the right shows basically the results of that HART grant. We have the equipment to set up a digitization station, but because space is lacking in our history room, we moved that to the friends room or the volunteer room. And in this photo, I'm helping Carolyn Frederick, our archivist, scan a document. Soon we will scan the 100-page journal, Chatham D. Matthews, which covers the years 1886 to 1890. Mr. Matthews was a descendant of the early settlers in Peters Township. He was born in 1857. His journal describes daily life in Peters Township, include living on his 100-acre farm. So we extend our gratitude to the Hutchinson and to the Matthews families and all the other persons who have donated materials that are helping establishing this pretty amazing Peters Township Archives. So Carrie, again, we'll talk about, in fact, the display I think that you're seeing in the photo is right behind Carrie now. So you'll get to see, if you stop in the library, it'll be awesome because we have a couple displays. Next slide, please.
As Margaret mentioned, I feel like it's surround sound. I've got Dairy Bar all around me. I have the display that was in the lobby. I brought it up as a backdrop for tonight's presentation, but it will be back in the lobby tonight. When we think of the McMurray Dairy Bar, I think Robert Chamberlain's painting captures what many of us recall from days gone by. The big windows in the corner where homemade ice cream was made, the creaky, uneven floors, tables surrounded by the Coca-Cola chairs, and of course, the smell of that Dairy Bar ham. Who can forget that? Today with my colleague, Margaret Deitzer, we'll take you back in time for more stories from the archives. Tonight about the McMurray Dairy Bar. Let's journey back in time over 100 years to early Peters Township and the intersection of McMurray Road and Valley Brook Road. Next slide, please.
This slide is of the village of McMurray. Those who attended our program in January, we talked about the village of McMurray and how it evolved into the McMurray Town Center, but we didn't include the Dairy Bar at that time because we knew we could present an entire story on the Dairy Bar. So it starts way back in the late 1800s, but these photographs are from the 1900s. So the photograph on the left is from the early 1900s, and it shows the McMurray Farm family estate located at the intersection of McMurray Road and Valley Brook Road, which was known at that time as the Washington Pike, the main highway between Washington, PA and Pittsburgh, PA. Several McMurray family businesses operated at this site, such as a general store, a flour mill, a post office, telephone company, and a cooperative dairy. Then across the bridge from the McMurray family enterprises in the northwest corner of that intersection of McMurray Road, Isaac W. Simpson established a general blacksmith shop. Next slide, please.
Isaac Wycliffe Simpson was born 169 years ago, September 17th, 1853, in Snowden Township, now South Park Township. His mother died when he was only 7 years old, but his father remarried, and Isaac lived with his father, the new wife, and many siblings until he was 25, when he married Anna Boyer. Isaac, his wife Anna, and two sons, Frank and Guy, are reported in the 1900 census living in Peters Township and operating the I.W. Simpson and Sons blacksmith shop that you see here in the photo on the left. Left to right in the photo are Isaac Simpson and his sons, Frank and Guy. This photograph was donated to the PTPL Archives by Reverend Kenneth Simpson, who visited the library in 2012. He was the son of Guy Simpson. He dated this photograph as approximately 1913, with Isaac at age 60, Frank at age 23, and Guy at age 16. The photo on the right is just something amazing that was discovered this week. While I was visiting the planning department next door in the township building, I discovered an oversized book, The Washington County Farm Line Maps by Miller and Schmidt. On page 23 of the book, identified all the property lines in Peters Township, and I was able to locate the Simmons plot at the intersection of McMurray and Valley Brook Roads. And you can see that highlighted there in the yellow box. To give you some perspective, this was the early 20th century. The population in Peters Township was 1,596. That's about 200 more students. That's about 200 more students that are currently enrolled at the Peters Township High School. So Peters Township was quite small back then. In 1917, the United States joined the Great War. Prohibition was in place, and the 19th Amendment granted women the right to vote. Next slide, please. To service the booming automobile industry, the blacksmith shop was converted to a garage. On the left is an ad from the Pittsburgh Press Sunday paper from 1916, listing I.W. Simpson and Son, McMurray, PA, as providing service for Studebakers. On the right is an ad for Firestone tire sales in the Daily Notes of Canonsburg from 1918. Next slide, please. The photo on the left shows the Simpson family home. On the right side of this photo with the yellow arrow, you can see the curved portion of East McMurray Road going up a slight hill. At the top of that curve, many years later, the Township Municipal Building and the library would be built. On the left side of that photo, 2 gas pumps are visible next to the back wheel of an automobile. The right photo is another view of the Simpson family home. And on the porch is Anna Simpson, and her son Frank is near the gas pumps. Many changes. Could you go back one slide? Sorry, I was still had a little bit more. Many changes were in store for the Simpson family in the 1920s. Isaac's son Frank had registered for the draft and served in the Great War for 2 years through August 1919. After his military service, he returned home and became a constable in Peters Township and was later elected a patrolman. At age 22, his brother Guy was working as a mechanic at the family garage. Sadly, Isaac Simpson became ill with pneumonia and he passed away in early 1923 at the age of 70. Frank married Miss Louise Donaldson in 1924 and rented an apartment in Canonsburg with his new bride. So that leaves Anna Simpson and her son Guy remaining in their home in McMurray for a short time. Anna was able to celebrate her 70th birthday there in 1926 before moving to Canonsburg with her son Frank and her daughter-in-law Louise. We were visited in the library recently by Raymond Holmes, grandson of Guy Simpson. He explained that due to extending credit to their many customers, the Simpson family fell on hard times. Beginning in 1926, for sale notices began to appear in the daily notes for the Simpson property and the buildings. 7.5 acres, a 6-room house and bath, cemented cellar, furnace, hot and cold water in the house, garage, general store. The house and property never did sell. So 2 years later, in August 1928, the property, home, and garage was put up for a sheriff's sale. Next slide.
So looking at this photo, it's the McMurray BBQ building. This basically brings an error to those that worked in the McMurray BBQ and the Simpson establishments before it finally is turned over to the Duckworth family. So by 1928, the building above was known as the McMurray BBQ. It was a combination general store, gas station, and barbecue. Gas pumps were added in 1927, and they were shown in the previous slide, and they were added most likely by the Simpson family. The addition of gas pumps at this location was significant, as it was the first and the only gas station located on the Washington Pike, which at that time was the main highway between Washington, PA and Pittsburgh, PA. This gas station was located approximately midway between these two cities. So the combination gas station and general store and barbecue, which is shown in this picture, operated for several years as the McMurray BBQ. Next slide, please.
I have a few more comments, Margaret.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry.
During the sheriff's sale in 1928, the property was purchased by Charles W. Martin of Mount Lebanon. He rented the house and the service station to George E. Gass, if you can believe that name, for 2 years. Several ads were run in the local papers to rent the barbecue stand at the McMurray service station during that time, but we found no records showing who operated the barbecue during those years. In February 1932, Charles Martin sold the property, the McMurray service station, and the barbecue to Charles A. Herbertson. Maybe some of you remember Cy Herbertson. He was the older gentleman who sold popsicles and ice cream at the McMurray barbecue. He also lived in the former Simpson home with his wife, Emily, his daughter, Margaret Irene, who was known as Irene, and his son-in-law, Al Attenborough, who ran the McMurray service station. After 20 years, on March 9th, 1951, Cy Herbertson prepared a deed to sell all the property and the buildings to his son-in-law, Al, and his daughter, Irene, for $1. Next slide. The photo on the left shows the original McMurray barbecue. The photo on the right from the Duckworth family papers shows the general store as it was updated many years later by Donald Duckworth. Let's talk a bit about how the Duckworths came to own this property and their connection with Cy Herbertson. Next slide, please. Donald Duckworth was born on January 6, 1924. He lived on Edgemont Street in Mount Washington neighborhood of Pittsburgh with his father, his grandmother, and his siblings. His mother was Pearl Herbertson Duckworth, and she was the daughter of Cy Herbertson. So let me say that again. Donald Duckworth's mother, his mother was Pearl Herbertson's Duckworth, and she was the daughter of Cy Herbertson. Pearl tragically had passed away when Don was only 4 years old. He attended South Hills High School, served in the military during World War II, and he married Margaret Peg Wilhelm on Christmas Day in 1943. A column in the Washington Observer in 1948 notes a visit from 24-year-old Donald Duckworth and his son Gary to visit his grandfather in McMurray. What could they have discussed during this visit? Cy was in his 80s at the time. We are assuming he was interested in looking for someone to take over operations of the McMurray barbecue. At this time, Al was working as an assistant foreman for Draveau in Neville Island. We know that from the 1950 census, that Don was working at the dairy bar and service station. Don, his wife Margaret, and son Gary lived in the tiny attic space above the store, while Cy, son-in-law Al, and Irene, daughter Irene, they remained in the white house that was next door. A deed was prepared in February 1955 in which Irene and Al Attenborough, with natural love and affection and the sum of $1, granted and conveyed the property and building to Donald Duckworth. A few months later, Cy died on August 6, 1955 at age 88. Margaret, you have some comments about this photo too?
Yes, I do. I wanted to speak a little bit about the Emmerich Motors. You can see it's the building on the left of the dairy bar. Albert Alvy Spike Emmerich recently visited the library, and he shared information about the building shown on the left, Emmerich Motors. His uncle, Kenneth Emmerich, leased the building from the Duckworth family and opened Emmerich Motors. Spike Emmerich, he chose to be called Spike because he said everybody knows him by Spike. He studied to be an electrician at a trade school, and then he served his apprenticeship. Following this apprenticeship, Alvey wired Emmerich Motors for his uncle. This occurred around 1951, 1952. According to a deed dated September 13th, 1954, from the McMurray Supply Company to Kenneth G. Emmerich, Kenneth did not remain long at this location. The deed states for a certain lot or piece of ground situated in Peters Township along the state road to Venetia. So he took his repair service, automobile repair service, to a location on what is now known as Venetia Road. But in that deed, it was called the state road to Venetia. At that time and in earlier years, it was often referred to the highway to Venetia or the Venetia Highway. That is the part of Valley Brook Road today that today is the road that goes from the intersection to Bebop Road, straight up that way, straight from actually Route 19. Valley Brook Road runs that way, whereas McMurray Road runs around, as Carrie explained in that earlier, goes up by the houses on the left side and then municipal on the building. But that McMurray Road at that time was known as the Washington Pike, and the Valley Brook portion of the road was known as the highway to Venetia. So when we spoke with Spike, we also learned an interesting fact. He graduated from Peters Township High School in 1950, although he was not a resident of Peters Township. He lived in Upper St. Clair. At that time, Spike explained that Upper St. Clair did not have a high school and that the district paid the tuition for students to attend high school in one of the designated nearby school districts. So his family, he and his sisters chose to attend Peters Township High School as they lived on that nearby Hayes Road. Part is in Peters and part is in Upper St. Clair. Another story, not about the dairy bar, but it's related to the schools. From resources in the PTPL archives, we know that in the early 1960s, the Pennsylvania legislature introduced a bill imposing on school districts in Pennsylvania to draft a plan to reorganize and consolidate. Interestingly enough, a merger with the Upper St. Clair School District in Peters Township was a part of this discussion. Next slide, please. This is this is one of the early McMurray Dairy Bar buildings. Donald and Peg Duckworth took over ownership and operations of the dairy bar in late 1949. In the early days, Donald and Peg focused on the lunch counter and a few small booths to serve customers. They added dairy products and a few groceries and renamed the store the McMurray Dairy Bar. Their deli counter became well known for the delicious baked ham and their cheese selections. Their reputation for excellent food and excellent service extended beyond Peters Township as many persons continued to travel on this main road from Washington, PA to Pittsburgh. At this time, the Duckworth family made their home on the top floor of the store. And you can see the laundry room to the right, just to the right of the car and to the right of the building. Donald and Peg Duckworth renovated and or remodeled the dairy bar 4 times during the time they owned and managed the building, but they always keeping the concept of a local grocery store operating for the convenience of the customer. So you can talk about the snow now. This Lattimore photograph shows the big snow, November 24th, 1950, 27.4 inches of snow fell in the Pittsburgh area. During this heavy snowstorm, Donald Duckworth drove food to stranded customers on his tractor. His wife, Peg, is said to have crawled on her hands and knees from the store to the pumps to put gas in a road plow so that the drivers could continue to spread ashes. These actions during this big snowstorm endeared the Duckworths to their customers. At this time, we want to introduce a special guest who can tell her stories about the dairy bar. When we were planning our program, we received a call from Mrs. Hershman, Mrs. Carolyn Hershman. She called us to tell us that she heard about our story that we were planning about the dairy bar, and she was disappointed that she couldn't share memorabilia or photographs with us. But she explained that she really enjoyed working at the dairy bar, and she wanted to share some memories with us as we planned our program. We found her story so fascinating. We asked her if she would share the stories with you tonight. So Carolyn Hershman was a Peters Township High School graduate and a graduate of Pennsylvania State University. She went on to teach business courses in New York, but she worked at the dairy bar while in high school and during her summer vacations home from college. So she worked in the dairy bar spanning the years 1951 to 1958. Welcome, Carolyn.
Hello, Carolyn.
Hello. Hello.
Oh, hi, Carolyn. So you told us how much you enjoyed working in the dairy bar. Can you just tell us why you enjoyed working in the dairy bar?
Yes, I really enjoyed having my first paid job. I made 35 cents an hour. Can you imagine how many hours I had to work to make a paycheck of $21? And that was the largest paycheck I made the whole time I worked at that dairy bar. Don Duckworth, however, he was very fair and kind to his employees. We only had about 4 or 5 working there at the time. My mother worked there first, and years later, after I was long out of there, my sister even worked at the dairy bar. When I worked there, I worked with Eddie Johnson. He actually was in charge when Don and Peg weren't there. Eddie could do anything inside the store as well as tend the gas pumps. And we had quite a few gas customers, so Eddie was quite valuable. Also, I worked with my 2 best friends, Jane Patch McClure and Rita Kopp Feefelt. Don did have his expectations of us, which we learned on the first day there. The first was, if anyone comes in to rob the store, open the register and say nothing. The second was, never sit down. There is always work to be done. Believe me, we learned that very quickly. And the third, which he emphasized probably the most, was the customer is always right. We didn't have a lot of trouble with that because all our customers, well, most of them at any rate, were very local people, and we knew everybody. Peters Township was all farms at that time. One thing we did have to know, though, was how to do arithmetic well, or math, you might call it. If a customer bought 2 or maybe 12 items, we had to list the price of those items on a paper bag and add them up. We had to know how to add correctly because, believe me, the customers knew, but we were very accurate at that. And everyone at that time, of course, paid with cash. So there were no credit cards.
Okay, Carolyn. So from your time in the McMurray Dairy Bar, can you kind of describe the typical customer? You said you had a lot of regulars. So what did they generally visit the dairy bar for? Do you have a sense of your regular customers?
Yes, most of our customers came in for homemade ice cream, which Dawn made, of course, and ice cream cones cost 5 cents, 6 cents if you wanted a sugar cone. We also hand-packed ice cream, lots of quarts of ice cream we hand-packed. I always thought I could never get enough ice cream to eat, but after you worked with ice cream every day, all day long, you really didn't even like it that much anymore. The most famous thing, though, that Don was known for was his baked ham. People came from all over for baked ham, just not Peters Township. And at the time, especially, Don could hardly keep up making all those hams, baking them all. At holiday time and at different events that our local people had, that baked ham was the best. We also sold a lot of other cold cuts, and we handled Auto Milk. That was the name of the milk company that he got his milk from, and Town Talk Bread.
Okay, Carolyn, the lunch counter. Do you have any stories about the lunch counter? Was it popular at that time?
Well, we had a few customers for lunch. The most notable was Joe Hardy, who owns 84 Lumber, and his brother. My mother served them. I did not. I served Perry Como's caddy. Perry golfed at the Mount Lebanon Golf Course, which is now the site of Peters Township High School. And he would send his caddy down to get his lunch, and of course, lunch for the caddy also. The regulars were Herman Bennett, who owned the McMurray Supply Company, and Roberta Rennie, his secretary. They came in about every day. We served hamburgers for a quarter. Hot dogs were 20 cents. We had soup that we could heat out of a can. And of course, some people bought the baked ham sandwiches too. And then we had, of course, milkshakes and ice cream sundaes.
All right, Carrie, I know you have a question for Carolyn.
Well, Carolyn and I were talking a little bit before we started tonight about the baked ham. And Carolyn said, you know, she pointed out some important things about Dawn's baked ham, not necessarily the recipe, but what she felt was a critical part of having that baked ham so it would bake properly. Carolyn, do you want to explain about that?
Yes, I do remember what Dawn did with the hams. Of course, the hams that he baked were flat on the top. They weren't like a ham that you would buy in a store. They're more like a ham that you would get ham sliced off of in a deli today. But on those hams, he scored them, put cloves in them. Then he poured vinegar over them, white Karo syrup, and white sugar. And then he baked them. That's it.
Next slide, please.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you. All right, this slide on the left side is a photograph of Marlene Fife serving a customer at the deli counter. The deli counter was probably one of the biggest customer draws. Over the years, the McMurray Dairy Bar continued to be recognized for its hometown qualities, the deli counter, its homemade ice cream, and its special baked ham, all of which Carolyn told us about in her stories. Over the year, according to an article in the Canon, in October 31st, 1988 article in the Canon, Gary Duckworth reported that his father, Donald Duckworth, worked in a deli on Mount Washington, and he brought the delicious baked ham recipe with him to the dairy bar. So that kind of ties in what we learned earlier, that Donald Duckworth grew up on Mount Washington. So Donald Duckworth also made homemade ice cream, and he often included fresh fruit from the dairy bar. And one such was his cantaloupe, and that became a very well-known cantaloupe ice cream, a favorite of his customers. So moving on to the next photo there. In 1957, or the McMurray Dairy Bar adds a new convenience for its customers. The McMurray Postal Branch, which offered stamps, money orders, and outgoing mail. This is a photograph of Mr. Wallace McMurray mailing the first parcel at the new McMurray Postal Branch, and Peg and Donald Duckworth are also in that photograph. Tom McMurray is here with us tonight, and Wallace McMurray is his grandfather. So, Tom, are there a couple memories that you can share with us? Would you like to share a memory with us this evening?
Well, sure. Thank you. I think that many of us will remember that the post office may have started there, but afterwards it moved in a new addition after that went on. So it was actually more of a counter space on the other side of the cash registers in the new addition. One of the memories I think I share with many people that are listening is the actually counter there. There used to be stools all the way along there where you could go and actually sit up there and have your lunch as well as the booths. A favorite memory of my grandfather's is we would get down there, and of course you had to have a milkshake and you had to have a baked ham sandwich. That was kind of a required. It was kind of like the Permanentes or anything else of Pittsburgh. The Dairy Bar ham was in from here. After you have it, you would have a treat of picking candy from on top of the counter. There was a glass enclosed case all the way along, and you could pick some candy out of that, and that would kind of top off the day. And of course, you never got out of there very quickly because there was always people there that you knew. At those days, pretty much everybody that came in, you had knew who they were, or at least their name, or they were familiar. So, okay, thank you.
Well, thanks, Tom, and thanks, Carolyn, and thank you for sharing your stories tonight. So, next slide. Carrie?
So the November 1961 News Progress announced the gala opening of the all-new McMurray Superette and Dairy Bar. Pamela Benton donated a clicker that was given away to the customers of the Superette at the opening, and a McMurray Dairy Bar apron. And both of those items are on display in the library that you can visit after this program. The Duckworths added this L-shaped addition onto the store at the rear of the building facing Valley Brook Road. It gave the store more of a Superette flair and certainly increased the parking in the area. The store was open 7 days a week and only closed on Christmas Day. It tripled in size and became a full-service grocery store. They carried a complete line of national brands, as well as, of course, the original Dairy Bar ham and the homemade ice cream. Eventually, Ken Lash took over making the homemade ice cream from Donald. In other big news, in 1963, residents were asked to vote for the name of a new post office at the Donaldson's Crossroads Shopping Center. Apparently, there was quite a controversy over the name. 3 options were given: McMurray, Donaldson's Crossroads, or Peters Township. In a special 3-day election, the name of the McMurray Post Office was selected by residents. So it was called the McMurray Post Office, as we all know now. This program would not be complete without mentioning another big event in the township, the attempted burglary at the Dairy Bar in January of 1967. 4 young men attempted to rob the store in the middle of the night and exchanged gunfire with Donald Duckworth, who was wounded in the chest. The thieves took off in a stolen car, which they ran into a ditch. Over a period of several months, all 4 men were later captured and sentenced to prison terms, and Donald thankfully recovered from his injuries. Next slide.
I think I wanted to talk a little bit about Terry Hazlitt's memories before we went to that slide.
Okay.
So Terry Hazlitt couldn't be with us tonight, but he worked in the Dairy Bar in, I think, around the 1960s. So Terry sent along some of his comments to share with us. So Terry, from Terry, I don't know how many other homes Mr. Duckworth visited on Christmas Eve, but he was at our house every Christmas Eve in his Santa suit. We had a big family, so there were always believers in our house. And of course, the kids were particularly impressed because he always knew their names. I worked there on Saturday mornings for a few years when I was very young. I am thinking 1963, 1964. I put worked in quotation marks because I truly think the Duckworths let me work there as a favor to my dad, who was one of the store's loyal regulars, buying cigarettes and chipped ham just about every day. My dad also installed the flooring in the big expansion section that you see in this photograph. When the expansion was taking place, and it truly was the talk of the town for a while, I remember Donald Duckworth reassuring his customers that the meat slicer would not be replaced or moved to a new department. Why? Well, the prevailing thought was the dairy bar chipped ham tasted better because the meat slicer had been used for so long, it gave the ham a slightly more seasoned taste. Can't comment on that, but I know of many people who went out of their way to buy their lunch meat only at the dairy bar. For me, the best part of working at the dairy bar, and probably many others, was the free lunch. I had the same lunch every week, a chipped ham sandwich and a vanilla milkshake. I got the entire milkshake container, which would easily fill 2 glasses. Over the years, several grocery stores opened in McMurray. I think there were once 4 major grocery stores at the crossroads, but the dairy bar continued to prosper. The Duckworths truly appreciated and knew their customers, and the customers truly liked the Duckworths. I imagine hundreds of school kids worked at the dairy bar at some point. For many, it was their first experience. The Duckworths went out of their way to make sure it was a pleasurable one. So I'm just wondering, I know that when we talked to Carolyn earlier, she had said that if you worked in the dairy bar during lunch or during the dinner hour, you were offered a free lunch, a free milkshake, and a free sandwich. And again, Terry has that. So I'd like to think maybe that was one of the bonuses that was offered to their employees, especially their students. So I think, Carrie, unless you have any more comments, we're ready to move on to the next slide.
I think the next slide, yes.
Okay. All right, the gas stations. So we keep hearing about the gas stations, and they certainly have advanced from the gas pumps that were installed in 1927. And they're not the only gas station on the road from the Washington Pike. But we have a photograph here of Arco is supplying the gas in 1980. And there's another photograph on the right that Texaco is supplying the gas in 1985. But let's go step back a little bit. And Richard Matthews got in touch with us last week, and he shared a story with us that, well, first of all, the Matthews family are long-term supporters to the PTPL Archives, including a recent financial donation from Richard Matthews. So he shared the fact that he worked in the dairy bar in, let's see, when did he work there? He got his first job pumping gas and stocking shelves at the dairy bar. And he said this occurred around the summer of 1963. And in that message, he also shared a story that Donald Duckworth, dressed in his Santa Claus costume, also appeared at their home on Christmas Eve. So again, I'm beginning to have a sense that that was a tradition of the Duckworth family at the Christmas holiday. So according to an article, October 31st, 1988 issue of the Canon, The dairy bar pumped gas until early 1988, and then that part of the McMurray Dairy Bar was shut down. So in 1987, Donald and Peg Duckworth retired, and they turned over ownership and operations of the dairy bar to their son Gary and his wife Carol.
Before we move on, Margaret, I just want everybody to notice how close, especially in that Texaco photo, how close those pumps are to the edge of McMurray Road. I know that intersection was the scene of many accidents through the years. In fact, there was an accident there in 1955 that actually knocked one of the pumps loose from its foundation and crashed into the front porch on the White House that the Herbertsons were living in at the time. So there were a lot of dangerous accidents there. And I think that's one of the major reasons why that intersection was planned to be realigned.
Well, and also, Carrie, I recall from that message that Richard Matthews sent us that he, I guess he responded to your inquiry that the gas pumps were located only about 4 feet from the road.
Right.
So that kind of makes sense that I wonder if the Township Planning Department, your next visit there, they might have statistics on the crashes, if not the robberies.
Right.
So next slide, please.
It's exciting area of the township for sure.
Forever, for
Yeah.
decades, if not centuries.
Right.
I would like to introduce Tom McMurray formally now. Tom is the current president of the Peters Township School Board, and he has family members that have a long history, and that is going back to the early 1900s. McMurray family members have played a major part in the development of the Peters Township school system. He also serves on the Peters Township Ambulance Service, and he is a lifelong Peters Township resident. Tom, thank you for taking time to join us tonight and share this important part of the McMurray Dairy Bar, how it really was a neighborhood grocery and how they really made their customers feel welcome. Tom.
Okay, thank you. I think that the picture that you have up in there is the core group that used to hang out in the morning, had their coffee and discuss what was going on in the world at the time. This group here was pretty much a core group, but every day you never knew who was going to be there. People would stop in to see what the township was like. People who had lived here in the past would come back. We would have some of the favorite memories was when a politician would come in who was campaigning, and talk about walking into a trap. Didn't matter what party they belonged to. They were taking over the coals pretty good, and they were always glad to get out of there. Another favorite memory was when the old bridge used to be there. It was decided by the state or somebody to put a walking bridge right beside it. And it seemed like it took about 6 years to get that bridge in. And this group of guys just had a ball working over these poor workers of how long it would take to do this. It's kind of like watching some workers taking quite a long time to go with that. Some of the things about there was a lot of things that were always discussed, and there was so much history from the group of people that would come in. You never left without learning an awful lot about how Peters Township was in the early days or what was going on. There was always a group represented from different churches, different schools, different areas of the township. So you always had a pretty good feel when you left there of something that might be going on, and you never left without learning something new. One thing I always thought was good about this group was that there were some pretty healthy discussions and disagreements as the days went along, but they always had left friends, and they'd be back the next day, and they would keep on going for a long time. And I think that said a lot about Peters Township. Was over the years, there's been a lot of that. You might have your disagreements, but you come back and remember things, and especially the history of the dairy bar, which drew a lot of people together. That was someplace, as has been said, you go there and everybody knew your name, I guess, just like the cheers of Peters Township. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. Next slide, please.
Okay. This is a group of people, guys who are in the morning. My dad, Bob McMurray, Zeke Long, Bob Matthews, and Dave Falloon. And one of the special treats was when one of the guys would make what they called sticky buns. And pretty much that was a bunch of dough and an awful lot of brown sugar and butter. And it would come down there and everybody get pretty well psyched up on that and then put more butter on top of it. So cholesterol was not a concern in those days, but that was one of the very favorite treats on a Saturday morning.
Oh, thanks. And I could just make a comment. I think you said that's Bob Matthews. Is that correct, Tom?
Yes,
Bob
Bob McMurray, Zeke Long, Bob Matthews, and Dave Flynn in the red hat.
Right.
Okay. Well, it is his grandfather's diary that we will be scanning and digitizing and eventually placing on PA photos and documents that tells the history of the township during the, I guess, the mid 1800s. And another word about that, and it is his son that is here, and I guess his daughter also that are here tonight registered for the program. But they owned a lot of that property around the dairy bar. So again, we're pleased to share these stories, and thank you, Tom, for again sharing what your memories of the dairy bar.
Thank you.
Ready for our next slide.
Thank you, Tom. This is a photograph of the McMurray Dairy Bar prior to the McMurray Road, Valley Brook Road reconstruction project. At that point in time, Mike Silvestri, the former Peters Township manager, reported in an article for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette that the intersection handled over 14,000 cars each day. Out of the picture on the far left was the small narrow bridge that caused problems for turning trucks and school buses. Plans included aligning the two legs of Valley Brook Road and installing a traffic signal. The sharp bend on McMurray Road would be straightened to help with the traffic. And you can also see on the left side of this photo towards the middle, there was a drive over the Brush Run Creek that you drove over to get to the VFW parking lot. This was covered over when Valley Brook Road was widened and realigned into a straight stretch of road. Next slide.
All right, let's look at these two slides. That is during the construction of what it looked like the dairy bar at that time. Now, for you folks, if you can go back and remember our early slides that were up there of the McMurray Village, then the McMurray Town Center, then the dairy bar corner. This is that very same intersection that has evolved, as Carolyn told us back in the day, in the 50s, it was kind of a rural, everybody knew your name. Now we're here, and the dairy bar is looking for their plans to expand after this 2-year reconstruction of the road and the building of a new bridge is completed. So let's just think about those who are coming into the room. You got to hear what one of the quotations or look at, and it's from Gary Duckworth. We'll continue to keep the doors open during this road project, even if we only get one customer each day. So it was very difficult for them to keep the store open. The temporary removal of the bridge and the ongoing reconstruction of the McMurray and Valley Brook Road intersection sent drivers on long detours, making it extremely difficult to get to the McMurray Dairy Bar. Gary Duckworth noted, before Valley Brook Road at the McMurray Road interchange was closed, the store averaged about 1,300 customers daily. But in the past week, customers have dwindled to about 200 each day. McMurray Dairy Bar was having difficulty meeting their daily expenses. And at that time, Gary and Carol Duckworth were looking forward to the completion of the road construction so they could build a new dairy bar reflecting the increased population that lived in the township, yet remaining a convenience store, not competing with other grocery stores, but building a store that will be convenient to its loyal customers. So
Next
slide.
This photograph shows the completed reconstruction of Valley Brook and McMurray roads. Both roads were widened and realigned, and the traffic lights were installed. The yellow arrow directs your attention to the McMurray Dairy Bar and its proximity to the intersection. On the right side of the photo, you can see the new dairy bar planned by Gary and Carol Duckworth under construction, only a few hundred feet away, with work being done on the roof. Next slide, please. Here's the same photo on the left from the previous slide. As a comparison on the right, I captured this photo this week. I wanted to show you that the credit union now occupies the corner where the original dairy bar was located. So if you were not familiar with where the old dairy bar was and the areas, the intersections we're all talking about, this shows you where the dairy bar was located and currently where the credit union is located. That was the location of the dairy bar back in the day. Next slide.
So we are soon coming to the end of the story of the landmark dairy bar, the McMurray Dairy Bar. This new store opened in March 26, 1999. In the spring of 1999, Gary Duckworth excavated the original McMurray Dairy Bar, which he kept open during the entire of construction, and reported he would never tear it down or close the store until the new store opened. The new store was built on a lot of 13,143 square feet, more than double the size of the former location. So the new development was known as the McMurray Town Center, taking us way back to the 1900s. Another sad day in a way, February 10th, 2014, ownership of the dairy bar and market changed from the Duckworth family to the Heisler family, now becoming Heisler's Market. Next slide, please.
So this concludes another edition of the Stories from the Archives Dairy Bar edition. This is just a reminder that 2023 will mark the 20th anniversary of the library's first major history project, the Life in Peters Township and Oral History Project from 2003. You can listen to the 20 fascinating interviews that were conducted and read the transcripts with the words of individuals who helped shape Peters Township. Dr. Howard Jack, John Apika, Robert Matthews, Robert Chamberlain, Robert Donaldson, Doris Trax, Irma Grego, Jean McMurray Hutchinson, Martha Miller Lattimore, Reed Day, Richard Frobe, Tom McMurray, Tina Wagner, Bill Northrup, Boyd Caldwell Roach, Charles Hodenshield, Dave Cushy, Dave Harmon, Edward Liebarger, and Elma Johnson. And I just want to note that many of these people that we interviewed 20 years ago are no longer with us, but their words are preserved in these oral histories. You can listen to them, their interviews, and you can also read the transcripts of those interviews. And that is all available at ptlib.org/PTPL photos. And we will send that link out after this program. So you can see the display behind me. This display will be returned downstairs to the lobby. And please stop by and visit and read the articles and see the memorabilia in the display case related to this program tonight. Next slide.
So we have some acknowledgements, and there you can just look at them. So we thank you, our audience, for your support. Suggest to us that you are really interested in us continuing our work of gathering materials for our archives, organizing the materials, preserving these materials, and also providing the finding aids so you can access them in the library and also access Pennsylvania photos, PA Photos and Documents, which is the digital library of the state of Pennsylvania through PA Power Library. So again, we welcome you to donate to the library. We welcome you to financially support the foundation. And most of all, thank you for your interest, because that is what really makes it happen. Carrie?
Next slide to show the sources for this program. These are all the family papers that were used in our research and the photographs that were used as part of this program. So if you do make a donation of materials to the history room, we do acknowledge your donation every time it is used, and you can see the number of people that were consulted, their records were consulted to put this program together tonight. Next slide.
Yes, and this is just an important land acknowledgement. The first Americans to occupy this land arrived around 1697, and it's important to honor their contributions and before we honor those people that inhabited the Peters Township in the late 1700s and the early 1800s. Again, this is our way of recognizing and honoring our Native Americans.
Next slide. And these are some additional resources if you want to go back and if you missed the program that we put together in January, the early histories of the village of McMurray. It is available on the Peters Township Library YouTube channel. Margaret and I have been mentioning several times PA Photos and Documents. There is a link to that location to see the Peters Township photos and oral history transcripts. And if you want to keep in the loop about these programs and more, you can sign up for our weekly newsletter at ptlib.org/news. But don't panic, we will be sending you an email reminder with all these links and resources. And also, I did find on the Peters Township Memory Lane Facebook group, a person shared earlier this year, I believe, the recipe for the McMurray Dairy Bar ham. So we will include a link to that recipe card when we send out all of these other resources to you after the program. Margaret, I think that concludes another Stories from the Archives.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to Tom, to Carolyn, and to Lacey, and yourself, Carrie, and just welcome all this participation with our archives.
We can look